In 1955, American and European windows worked almost the same way. In 2026, they work in completely opposite directions, and most people in either country have never realized the gap exists. Open a window in a typical American home. It either slides up vertically, slides sideways horizontally, or pushes outward on a hinge. The mechanism is simple. The window goes one direction. It is either open or closed. There is no third position. Open a window in a typical German, Austrian, or Dutch home. The handle has 3 settings. Turn it one way. The window pulls inward toward you on a hinge, exactly like a small door swinging into the room. Turn the handle the other way, and the same window stops opening like a door and instead tilts inward from the top only, leaving a small gap at the top while the bottom stays sealed against the frame. Same window, same handle. 2 completely different opening modes from a single piece of hardware. This is called a tilt-and-turn window. It is the dominant residential window style across most of Europe. It barely exists in the United States, and the gap between these 2 designs is one of the strangest examples on Earth of 2 wealthy countries solving the same problem with completely different machines, and then quietly forgetting that the other version even exists. If you have ever stood in a European apartment and watched someone tilt their window inward at the top with a casual flick of a handle while you instinctively reached for it like an American window and could not figure out how to open it, you have already noticed the second-order effect of this video. Here is what should bother you for the next 10 minutes. The American window did not stay simple because Americans like simple windows. It stayed simple because of 3 things that stacked on top of each other over 100 years and quietly locked the country out of the most efficient residential window design ever invented. And almost nobody in America today knows it happened, because the alternative is invisible to anyone who has not lived in Europe. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why your window opens the way it does, why the European version is dramatically better at 3 different jobs at once, and why even American manufacturers who tried to introduce tilt-and-turn windows to the US market mostly gave up. And the third reason is the one almost nobody knows. It is the legal fact that quietly made the European design nearly impossible to sell in American bedrooms for the last 50 years. Here is the punchline up front. American and European windows diverged not because the engineering was different. They diverged because of 3 things stacked together. A bug problem in North America that required window screens, which forced American windows to open outward away from the screen. A heating and cooling philosophy that turned American windows into sealed walls rather than ventilation devices. And an American building code that defined every bedroom window as a legal emergency exit, which the European tilt mechanism cannot satisfy. Take any one of those 3 away, and the American window starts looking more European. Take all 3 away, which is essentially how Europe never had any of these constraints in the first place, and you get the tilt-and-turn standard that has dominated residential construction across most of the continent for over 50 years. And here is the part most people never realize. The American window is one of the few common household items where the European version is unambiguously better at almost every measurable task. Better insulation, better ventilation, easier cleaning, better security, better noise reduction, better waterproofing. The reason it has not crossed the Atlantic is not because anyone has measured the engineering and chosen the American version on its merits. It is because 3 completely separate forces locked the American window into the shape it has, and nobody alive today has the incentive to redesign every window in the country. Hidden Systems explains the everyday things in your home that look like simple, obvious design choices, but are actually the result of forces, codes, and constraints stacked together long before you ever moved into the house. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Now let me walk you back to where this divergence started, with one of the smallest forces on Earth, the mosquito. In Europe, especially in the major population centers across the United Kingdom, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and northern Italy, the population density of biting insects has historically been moderate. There are mosquitoes, but they are not the constant summer presence they are across most of North America. Houseflies exist, but the numbers are manageable. The need to physically block insects from entering an open window has never been a daily structural requirement of European residential life. In the United States, the situation is the opposite across most of the country. Mosquitoes are dramatically more abundant. In the southern states, the Midwest, the East Coast, and large parts of the South and Texas, an open window without protection is an open invitation for insects. Across the entire American summer, leaving a window open without a screen is impractical in a way Europeans simply do not have to deal with. This single biological fact had massive design consequences. Every American window had to accommodate a screen. The screen had to sit on the inside of the window frame or in some kind of permanent track that did not interfere with the window opening. Which means the window itself had to open in a direction that did not collide with the screen. A window that opens inward into the room would smash into the screen. So American windows had to slide vertically, slide horizontally, or swing outward. European windows did not need screens, so they were free to do whatever made the most engineering sense. And the most efficient engineering for ventilation, insulation, and cleaning turned out to be a window that opens inward into the room, with a second mode that tilts from the top. The European window evolved to be brilliant because there were no mosquitoes constraining its design. Here I have to admit something. When I started researching this video, I assumed American windows were just an older, simpler design that Europe eventually upgraded past. The data forced me to throw that assumption out completely. European windows were not an upgrade. They were a parallel design path that became possible because of one biological fact American homes could not work around. The Americans were not behind. They were locked into a different problem. The behavior did not precede the system. The bugs created the system, and the system shaped every window in the country. First cause, the screen requirement forced American windows to open outward. This was the foundation. Every other constraint built on top of it. As long as American windows had to live with a screen, the entire family of European tilt-and-turn designs was off the table. The screen and the inward opening sash physically could not occupy the same space. American manufacturers had no incentive to invest in tilt-and-turn engineering for a market that could not use it without solving the screen problem first. A few companies have tried to design American versions with the screen on the outside instead of the inside, but the engineering becomes more complex, the cleaning gets harder, and the cost increases substantially. The market response has been small. The tilt-and-turn window remains a niche premium product in America, used in some luxury homes, mostly imported, often by people who lived in Europe and specifically requested them. The screen, in other words, did more than block bugs. It quietly locked an entire industry into one direction. Second cause, American HVAC turned windows into sealed walls. This is the part that explains why American windows did not improve when they could have. Starting in the 1950s, central air conditioning began spreading across American homes. By the 1980s, it was standard. By the 2000s, it was assumed. Most American homes today are designed to be cooled almost entirely by mechanical air conditioning rather than by opening the windows. This completely changed what a window had to do. In a European home that relies on cross-ventilation to cool itself, the window is an active machine. It opens, closes, tilts, and adjusts constantly throughout the day. The tilt mode lets cool morning air enter without slamming the window, lets warm afternoon air escape without leaving the home unsecured, and lets the window stay partially open in the rain without water entering through a wide opening. In an American home that relies on central AC, the window does almost nothing for ventilation. It exists mostly to let light in. The actual cooling happens through ducts and vents and a compressor unit outside the house. The window's job is to seal as tightly as possible to keep the conditioned air inside, not to participate in air movement at all. This shaped what American manufacturers built. Single-purpose windows, designed to be sealed, to look nice, designed to provide one mode of opening when needed, primarily for fresh air on pleasant days. No incentive to invent a window with two opening modes when one was already more than the typical American household used. European windows kept developing as ventilation machines because European homes kept relying on them as ventilation machines. American windows stopped developing as ventilation machines because American homes outsourced ventilation to the HVAC system. Two completely different evolutionary paths, driven by two completely different approaches to keeping a house comfortable. Third cause, American building codes defined bedroom windows as emergency exits. Here is the cause almost nobody knows, and it is the one that locked American bedroom windows into specific shapes for the last 50 years. American residential building codes, specifically the International Residential Code adopted in most states, require every bedroom to have what is called an egress window. The window must meet specific size requirements. It must open wide enough for an adult to physically climb through in case of a fire. It must be reachable from the floor. And the open area has to be a minimum size that varies by state, but generally requires substantial clear space. The European tilt and turn window in tilt mode does not produce a large enough clear opening for an adult to climb through. The tilt is too narrow at the top. Even in full turn mode, where the entire window swings inward like a door, some American egress codes interpret this differently than a sliding or outward opening window because of how the open area is measured. This created a regulatory mismatch. A European window that performs better at every other job a window has to do: ventilation, insulation, cleaning, weather sealing. Security runs into trouble specifically in American bedrooms because of fire egress rules written before tilt and turn windows existed in the American market. Manufacturers trying to introduce European-style windows in the US therefore have to redesign them, certify them, get state code approval, and convince builders to take the risk. Most have not bothered. The market is too small, the regulatory hurdle is real, and the existing American window industry is happy with the current design. Compare those two windows for a second. An American window opens one way, requires an outdoor cleaning method that some homeowners hire help to handle, seals reasonably well, and meets all emergency exit codes. A European window opens two ways from the same handle, can be tilted from inside for safe ventilation without security risk, can be fully rotated inward for easy cleaning of both sides without leaving the room, seals tighter against weather, blocks more sound, and represents arguably the most refined residential window design ever built. Same purpose, same century of construction, two completely different relationships with what a window is supposed to do. One window is a hole in the wall that can be opened. The other is a small machine. Neither is wrong, but they are not interchangeable. And an American visiting a German apartment for the first time and trying to figure out the window handle often looks like a person trying to operate a control panel from a future they do not understand. Stack those three causes together: a mosquito problem that required screens, an HVAC system that turned windows into seals, and an egress code that locked bedroom window shapes in place, and you get the modern American window. A design that has stayed remarkably consistent for decades, not because nothing better exists, but because every force that could have changed it was pulling against the change. So embedded in residential construction that most American homeowners have never heard of tilt and turn windows. So invisible to anyone who has not lived in Europe that the existence of a better design is essentially a secret. Now here is where it gets interesting. Premium American home builders, particularly in passive house construction and high-performance green buildings, have been quietly importing European tilt and turn windows for the last decade. The performance gap is so significant that for the most energy-efficient new homes, builders simply route around the American system and use German or Austrian windows shipped in directly. It costs more. It is more complicated. But for homeowners who care about thermal performance, sound insulation, and long-term efficiency, it is the only real option. There is one detail worth noting. European tilt and turn window did not exist in 1955 either. It was invented in Germany in the early 1960s, refined through the 1970s, and standardized across most of Europe by the 1980s. The American window industry actively chose not to adopt it during the same decades, partly because of the constraints already discussed, and partly because American manufacturers had no competitive pressure to do so. The market did not demand a better window, so no better window was built. Read that backwards. The European tilt and turn is not an old traditional design. It is a relatively modern innovation that Europe adopted aggressively while America declined to adopt at all. The American window is not the older, simpler version. It is the version that stayed the same while the other side of the Atlantic invented something dramatically better and rolled it out everywhere. The engineers who designed the first tilt-and-turn windows in 1960s Germany assumed that any country with similar climates and similar housing budgets would eventually adopt the same design. They could not have foreseen that an entirely different set of forces, mosquitoes, central air conditioning, and fire egress codes, would prevent the American window market from ever needing what the rest of Europe quietly built into every home for the last 50 years. Every American window today is, in a small way, the architectural fossil of a screen requirement, an HVAC philosophy, and a fire code that quietly chose for an entire country which mechanism it would use every day for the rest of its life. How do your windows open, slide, swing, or tilt? And if you have ever been in a European home and tried to operate a tilt-and-turn window for the first time, how long did it take you to figure out the handle? Drop it in the comments. I want to see how this varies across this channel. I read every single one.